The whole of occult science must spring from two thoughts that can take root in every human soul. For the occult scientist, these two thoughts express facts that can be experienced if we use the right means. These two thoughts are the following. First, behind the visible there exists an invisible world, concealed at the outset from the senses, and the thinking bound up with the senses. And second, it is possible for man, through the development of capacities slumbering within him, to penetrate into this hidden world. A human being comes to understand that he injures the whole universe and all its beings by not developing his forces in the proper way. The ether body is a second member of the human entity. For supersensible cognition, it possesses a higher degree of reality than the physical body. For the present, it may suffice to say that the ether body penetrates the physical completely, and that it is to be looked upon as a kind of architect of the latter. All organs are preserved in their form and shape by means of the currents and movements of the ether body. The physical heart is based upon an etheric heart, the physical brain upon an etheric brain, and so forth. The ether body is organized like the physical body, only with greater complexity. Wherever in the physical body separated parts exist, in the ether body everything is in living, interweaving motion. Everything living has an ether body. The power that awakens life again and again out of a state of unconsciousness is, according to supersensible cognition, the third member of the human entity. We may call it the astral body. Just as the physical body is unable to retain its form by means of the mineral substances and forces contained in it, but only by being interpenetrated by the ether body, so likewise the forces of the ether body are unable by themselves to illuminate this body with the light of consciousness. An ether body left entirely to itself would have to remain in a continuous state of sleep. An awakened ether body is illuminated by an astral body. For supersensible observation, the astral body still exists, but it appears to be separated or withdrawn from the ether body. Sense observation is not concerned with the astral body itself, but only with its effects within the manifest, and during sleep these effects are not directly present. In the same sense that man has his physical body in common with the minerals, his ether body with the plants, he is in regard to his astral body of the same nature as the animals. Plants are in a continuous state of sleep. A person who does not judge accurately in these things can easily fall into the error of ascribing a kind of consciousness also to plants that is similar to that of animals and men in their waking state. That, however, can happen only if he has an unclear idea of the nature of consciousness. It is then stated that if an external stimulus is applied to the plant, it makes certain movements like the animal. One speaks of the sensitivity of some plants that, for example, contract their leaves if certain outer stimuli act upon them. Yet it is not the characteristic of consciousness that a being reacts to certain stimuli, but the being experiences something in its inner nature that adds something new to the mere reaction. Otherwise, one could also speak of consciousness when a piece of iron expands under the influence of heat. Consciousness is present only when, through the effect of heat, the being, for example, inwardly experiences pain. The fourth member of his being that supersensible cognition must ascribe to man has nothing in common with the world of the manifest surrounding him. It is what distinguishes him from his fellow creatures, and through which he is the crown of creation belonging to him. Supersensible cognition forms a conception of this additional member of the human entity by calling attention to the essential difference in the experiences of waking life. This difference appears at once when man realizes that in the waking state he stands, on the one hand, always in the midst of experiences that of necessity come and go, and that, on the other hand, he has experiences in which this is not the case. This becomes especially clear when human and animal experiences are compared. The animal experiences with great regularity the influences of the outer world, and under the influence of heat and cold, pain and pleasure, under certain regularly recurring processes of its body, it becomes conscious of hunger and thirst. The life of man is not exhausted with such experiences. He can develop passions and desires that transcend all this. In the case of the animal, it would always be possible, were we able to go far enough, to show where the cause for an action or sensation lies, outside of or within the body. With man, this is by no means the case. He can produce desires and passions for whose origin neither the cause within nor without his body is sufficient. We must ascribe a special source to everything that falls within this domain. In the light of supersensible science, this source can be seen in the human ego. The ego can, therefore, be called the fourth member of the human entity. If the astral body were left to itself, pleasure and pain, feelings of hunger and thirst, would take place in it. But what would not occur is the feeling that there is something permanent in all this. Not the permanent as such is here called the ego, but what experiences this permanency. We must formulate the concepts precisely in this realm, if misunderstandings are not to arise. With the becoming aware of something enduring, something permanent, and the change of the inner experiences, the dawning of the ego feeling begins. The fact that a being feels hunger, for example, cannot give it to an ego feeling. Hunger arises when the renewed causes of it make themselves felt within the being in question. It pounces upon its food just because these renewed causes are present. The ego feeling appears when not only these renewed impulses drive the human being to seek food, but when pleasure has arisen at a previous appeasement of hunger, and the consciousness of this pleasure has remained, this making not only the present experience of hunger, but the past experience of pleasure, the driving force in the human being's search for food. Without the presence of the ether body, the physical body would decay. Without the illumination by the astral body, the ether body would sink into unconsciousness. In like manner, the astral body would have to let the past sink again and again into oblivion, were it not for the ego to carry this past over into the present. What death is for the physical body, and sleep for the ether body, oblivion is for the astral body. One might also say that life belongs to the ether body consciousness, to the astral body and memory, to the ego. It is even easier to fall into the error of ascribing memory to animals than it is to ascribe consciousness to plants. It is very natural to think of memory when a dog recognizes its master, whom he has not seen perhaps for a long time. Yet in reality, this recognition does not rest upon a memory, but upon something quite different. A dog feels a certain attraction to its master. This attraction proceeds from the master's personality. This personality causes pleasure in the dog when the master is in its presence, and every time the master's presence recurs, it causes a renewal of this pleasure. Memory, however, is only present when a being not only feels with its experiences in the present, but when it retains also those of the past. One might acknowledge this and still fall into the error of thinking that the dog has memory. For it might be said that the dog mourns when its master leaves it, therefore it has retained a memory of him. That also is an incorrect conclusion. Through sharing the master's life, his presence becomes a need to the dog, and it therefore experiences his absence, in the same way that it experiences hunger. Whoever does not make these distinctions will not arrive at clarity concerning the true relationships of life. What a man has to say to himself about his capacity for memory he cannot derive from inner soul observation, but only from what he experiences with himself in relation to the things and occurrences of the outer world. Man has these experiences with himself and with another human being, and also with animals in exactly the same way. He is blinded by pure illusion when he believes that he judges the existence of memory merely by means of inner observation. The power underlying memory may be called an inner power. The judgment concerning this power is acquired also in regard to one's own person, through the outer world by directing one's attention to the relationships of life, just as one is able to judge these relationships in regard to oneself, so one can judge them in regard to the animal. In regard to such things, our current psychology suffers from its wholly untrained, inexact ideas, deceptive to a great degree because of errors in observation. Memory and oblivion signify for the ego what waking and sleeping signify for the astral body. Just as sleep permits the cares and troubles of the day to disappear into nothingness, oblivion spreads a veil over the bad experiences of life, blotting out a part of the past. Just as sleep is necessary for the restoration of the exhausted life forces, so man has to eradicate certain parts of the past from his memory as if he is to approach new experiences freely and without bias. But precisely through forgetting, strength develops for perception of the new. Consider certain facts like that of learning to write. All the details the child has to experience in learning to write are forgotten. What remains is the ability to write. How would man be able to write if at every stroke of the pen all the past experiences in learning to write were to arise again in the soul as memory? Memory appears in various stages. Its simplest form occurs when a person observes an object and after turning away is able to call upon its mental image, is able to visualize it. He has formed this image while perceiving the object. A process has taken place between his astral body and his ego. The astral body has aroused the consciousness of the outer impression of the object, yet knowledge of the object would only last as long as the latter is present. If the ego were not to absorb this knowledge and make it its own, it is at this point that supersensible perception separates the bodily element from the soul nature. One speaks of the astral body as long as one considers the arising of knowledge of an object that is present. What, however, gives permanence to this knowledge one designates as soul. From what has been said, we can see at the same time how closely the human astral body is connected with that part of the soul that gives permanence to knowledge. Both are united into one member of the human entity. This union, therefore, may also be called astral body. If we desire an exact designation, we may call the human astral body the soul body. The soul, insofar as it is united with this soul body, we may call the sentient soul. The ego rises to a higher stage of its being when it directs its activity toward what it has made its own, out of the knowledge of the objects. This is the activity by which the ego severs itself more and more from the objects of perception in order to work within what it has made its own. The part of the soul in which this occurs may be designated the intellectual or mind soul. It is characteristic of both the sentient and intellectual souls that they work with what they receive through the impressions of the objects perceived by the senses, and what is retained from this in memory. The soul is here completely surrendered to what is external to it. What it makes its own through memory it has also received from outside, but it can pass beyond all this. It is not alone sentient soul and intellectual soul. For supersensible perception, it is easiest to give an idea of this passing beyond by pointing to a simple fact, the comprehensive significance of which, however, must be appreciated. This fact is the following. In the whole range of language, there is one name that, through its very nature, distinguishes itself from every other name. That name is I. Every other name may be given by every man to the object or being to whom it applies. The I as designation for a being has meaning only when this being applies it to itself. The name I can never resound to the ear of a human being from without as his designation. Only the being himself can apply it to himself. I am an I, to myself only. For every other person I am a you, and everyone else is for me a you. This fact is the outer expression of a deeply significant truth. The true nature of the I is independent of all that is external. Therefore its name I cannot be called to it by anything external. Those religious denominations that have consciously maintained their relationship with supersensible perception designate the I as the ineffable name of God. By using this expression, reference is made to what has been indicated. Nothing of an external nature has access to that part of the soul with which we are concerned here. Here is the hidden sanctuary of the soul. Only a being with whom the soul is of like nature can gain entrance there. The God who dwells within man speaks when the soul becomes aware of itself as an I. Just as the sentient and intellectual souls live in the outer world, so a third soul member immerses itself in the divine when the soul gains a perception of its own being. The above conceptions may easily be misunderstood as an attempt to identify the I with God, but it has not been stated that the I is God, but only that it is of the same nature and essence as the divine. The true nature of the I reveals itself only in the consciousness soul, for while the soul sinks itself into other things in feeling and intellect, as consciousness soul it takes hold of its own being. But if the I is to observe itself, it cannot simply surrender itself. It must, through inner activity, first lift its being out of its own depths in order to have a consciousness of it. With the perception of the I, with self-contemplation, an inner activity of the I begins. Through this activity, the perception of the I within the consciousness soul has a significance for man quite different from the observation of all that reaches him through the three corporeal members and the two other members of the soul. The force that discloses the I within the consciousness soul is indeed the same force that manifests in all the rest of the world. This force does not, however, appear directly in the body and in the lower members of the soul, but reveals itself by degrees in its effects. The lowest manifestation is the manifestation through the physical body. This then mounts up by stages to what fills the intellectual soul. One might say that, with each step upward, one of the veils that envelope the hidden falls away. In what fills the consciousness soul, the hidden enters unveiled into the innermost temple of the soul. Yet it appears there only like a drop out of the ocean of all-pervading spirituality. Here, however, man must first take hold of this spirituality. He must recognize it in himself. Then he will be able to find it also in its manifestations. What here like a drop penetrates into the consciousness soul, occult science calls the spirit. This consciousness soul is united with the spirit, which is the hidden in all that is manifest. If man wishes to take hold of this spirit in all manifestation, he must do it in the same way he takes hold of the ego in the consciousness soul. He must direct the activity that has led him to the perception of this I toward the manifest world. He thereby develops to higher stages of his being. He adds something new to the corporeal and soul members. The next thing is that he himself also conquer what lies hidden within the lower members of the soul, and this happens through his work on his soul, proceeding from the ego. How man is engaged in this work becomes evident if one compares a person who still surrenders himself to his lower passions and so-called sensual lust with a noble idealist. The latter develops out of the former if he rids himself of certain low inclinations and turns toward nobler ones. In doing so, he has worked on his soul, ennobling and spiritualizing it out of his ego. The ego has become master within the soul life. This can be carried so far that no desire, no enjoyment, can gain entrance into the soul without the I being the power that makes the entrance possible. In this way, the whole soul now becomes a manifestation of the I, as this was previously the case with the consciousness soul alone. In fact, all cultural life and all spiritual human endeavor consists in a work that has as its aim this rulership of the ego. Every human being living in the present age is engaged in this work, whether he wants it or not, whether he is conscious of it or not. Through this work, however, higher stages of the being of man are reached. Through it, a man develops new members of his being. These lie as the concealed behind what is manifest to him. Not only can he become master of the soul by working on the latter, through the power of the ego, so that the soul drives the concealed into manifestation, but he can also extend this work. He can extend it to the astral body. The I thus takes possession of this astral body by uniting itself with the latter's hidden nature. This astral body, overcome and transformed by the ego, may be called the spirit self. This is what in connection with the Oriental wisdom is called manas. In the spirit self we have a higher member of man's being, one which, so to speak, exists within it as a germ, and which emerges more and more as it actively works upon itself. Just as the human being conquers his astral body by penetrating to the hidden forces standing behind it, so too in the course of evolution does this happen with the ether body. The work upon the ether body is, however, more intensive than the work upon the astral body, for what is concealed in the former is enveloped by two veils, while the concealed in the astral body is veiled by only one. It is possible to form a concept of the difference in the work on these two bodies by pointing to certain changes that can take place in man in the course of his development. Let us call to mind how certain human soul qualities develop when the ego is working upon the soul, how passion and desire, joy and sorrow may change. It is only necessary to think back to the time of childhood. At that time, what was man's source of pleasure? What caused him pain? What has he learned in addition to what he was able to do in childhood? All this is only an expression of the way the ego has gained mastery over the astral body. For this body is the bearer of pleasure and pain, of joy and sorrow.